Nestled deep within the Appalachian wilderness, Blackwood Creek was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone. It was a place forgotten by time, where dusty dirt roads stretched between ramshackle houses and fields of untamed wildflowers. Among its residents lived Evelyn Grimshaw, a widow known for her radiant smile and kind heart. She spent her days tending to her garden and baking pies that earned her the affection of everyone in town. But Evelyn had her own grief quietly festering beneath her warm exterior. Years earlier, she had lost her husband, Samuel, in a hunting accident near the forest that bordered the town. It was said he had died instantly, though no one dared recount how gruesome his body had been when it was found. One late autumn morning, Evelyn ventured into the woods, her heart weighed by memories of Samuel. She often walked deep into the trees, clutching his old silver flask as though it carried part of his essence. That day, however, she ventured farther than she should have. Without realizing it, she crossed Blackwood Creek's invisible boundary into a desolate area locals warned was cursed. Among the twisted oaks and mist-shrouded glades, Evelyn found an ancient stone altar. Strange markings were carved into its surface, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly under the dim light breaking through the canopy above. An overwhelming sense of sorrow struck her, pulling her toward the altar. She knelt, placing her hand on the cold stone, whispering a plea. "If you can hear me, bring him back. Bring Samuel back," the forest answered. Evelyn awoke hours later in her garden as if no time had passed. But something had followed her home. Her dreams that night were plagued by shadows slithering in the corners of her mind. Whispered voices coiled around her, thoughts promising salvation in exchange for her devotion. The voice grew familiar, weaving its way into her every waking moment. By the time Evelyn realized she was no longer alone in her own consciousness, it was far too late. The changes came, slowly at first. Evelyn's appetite began to shift. No matter how much food she ate, it never satisfied her. The smell of baking pies made her sick, and the once sweet aroma of roasted chicken turned her stomach. Her skin grew pallid, and her once lively eyes dimmed into a hollow stare. It wasn't until her neighbor, Clara Mayfield, stopped by one evening that the hunger truly revealed itself. Clara had brought a loaf of fresh bread, concerned by Evelyn's frail appearance. "You need to eat, Evelyn," she said, setting the loaf on the table, her plump hands lingering with motherly kindness. "You're wasting away." But the hunger wasn't for bread. Evelyn watched Clara, her gaze drifting to the rhythm of her pulse at the base of her neck. Something stirred deep within her, a primal urge she couldn't explain. Before she realized it, she had lunged at Clara, pinning her to the floor. Clara's scream curdled into the night as Evelyn's teeth sank into her throat and then into her flesh. Blood pooled around them, staining the floorboards dark crimson, but Evelyn didn't stop. She tore at Clara's body, ripping skin from bone, consuming hungrily. The taste was ecstasy. When it was over, Evelyn sat trembling in the corner of her kitchen, shaking hands covered in blood. She tried to scream, but the sound stuck in her throat. It wasn't her. She would never have done such a thing. Yet the hunger purred, satisfied for now, whispering promises of more. The voice that had once been an invisible companion was now her master. Evelyn buried Clara's remains that night behind her house, digging violently into the dirt as her tears blurred her vision. The guilt crushed her chest, but even as she sobbed, she knew with chilling certainty that she would kill again. Blackwood Creek began to unravel as more people disappeared. Clara's absence was the first to draw attention. Her husband, Eli, pleaded with the townsfolk to search the woods for clues, but Evelyn remained silent during the gathering. She stood by the tree line, her shadowed face unreadable. Then it happened. Again. Curtis Green, the blacksmith, left for work early one morning and never returned. They found his mangled body in the meadow behind his forge, his chest split open, ribs gleaming white against the gore. Whispers of an animal attack ran through the town like wildfire. though the old women of Blackwood murmured about darker forces. Something was wrong in Blackwood Creek, and it was growing closer to home. Evelyn, meanwhile, spiraled deeper into her torment. Each night she tried to fight the hunger, chaining herself to her bed with restraint she had salvaged from Samuel's toolshed. But the voice was too powerful. It conjured illusions of her late husband in her mind, promising her that with every kill, she was one step closer to reuniting with him. "You're doing this for love," the voice said, velvet smooth against her fractured will. They would never understand. Only Samuel knows. By the time the townsfolk began investigating Evelyn's property, she had fully descended into monstrosity. The sounds of the forest became louder to her, the creak of branches whispering secrets only she could hear. When the Reverend Matthew and a small group arrived at Evelyn's door, she pretended to be the frightened widow they once knew. But the hunger was building. She led them inside, offering cups of tea brewed with a peculiar iron-rich tang. As she watched them drink, her jaw tensed, her mind racing with vivid visions of them split open before her. It was the Reverend's sudden expression of concern that broke her composure. He noticed the blood, small dried flecks staining the hem of her dress. "Evelyn," he whispered hoarsely, standing abruptly. "What have you done?" Her sharp laugh filled the room before her body moved without her control. She tore into them, her hands clawing and shredding as though they were paper. The study door slammed shut, muffling the chaos, but the screams echoed across the peaceful town. When Evelyn returned to the altar deep in Blackwood Forest, it was not to seek salvation, but the end of the voice that had claimed her. Bloodied and wild, she screamed at the ancient stone, demanding to be free. The shadow that answered her wasn't Samuel. It was something older, darker. It took the form of what she loved, whispering that her obedience wasn't a burden, but her only purpose. "You belong to me now," it said, coiling closer. "You will feed my hunger for eternity." Evelyn clawed at her face in anguish, screaming, against the cold grip around her soul. But there was no escape. Her body faded into the trees, becoming a legend townsfolk feared to speak of. Blackwood Creek remains silent now, but survivors say she still wanders the forest, her hollow cries mingling with the sounds of the wind. They say the curse lives within her, feeding never-ending hunger beneath the shadowed canopy for anyone foolish enough to cross her path. And should you hear her distant weeping, turn back, or risk being her next feast. The townsfolk of Blackwood Creek whispered of the strange woman who always seemed to linger at the edge of the forest, her silhouette just barely visible through the tangled trees. They no longer visited Evelyn's home, not since the Reverend and his companions vanished without a trace. Her garden had gone untended, its once vibrant blooms now wilted and overcome with tangled weeds, a reflection of Evelyn herself. Inside the house, Evelyn fought a war she could never win. The demon's voice had grown louder, burrowing into the darkest recesses of her mind. It taunted her with memories of Samuel, showing her visions of a life she once had. It whispered promises of peace, dangling hope like a cruel carrot over a pit of despair. But Evelyn knew better. She could feel the black hollow where her soul had once resided, the constant gnawing hunger that could only be sated with flesh. She no longer recognized the woman who stared back at her in the cracked mirror above the fireplace. Her gaunt face, hollow eyes, and blood-caked nails were that of a monster. That night, the wind spoke to her again. It carried the voices of those she had consumed, filled with terror and accusation. Evelyn pressed trembling hands to her ears, but it was futile. Their cries pierced through every barrier, mingling with the demon's laughter. "Why did you betray us?" the voices demanded, overlapping into a cacophony of despair. "Why did you choose the hunger over us?" "I didn't," Evelyn screamed, slamming her fists into the walls until they bled. "I didn't choose this." But the forest whispered back, its voice like dry leaves brushing against her sanity. "Didn't you?" Blackwood Creek found its first real clue to Evelyn's atrocities when Levi Garrison, the town's mill worker, discovered what lay beyond her house. The rumors had drawn him to her property despite his fear, and curiosity outweighed the warnings echoing in his mind. Levi ventured quietly in the pre-dawn fog, creeping past the overgrown garden toward the shed that stood at the rear of Evelyn's yard. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the metallic stench of decay. The door hung ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. When Levi pushed it open, he gagged. Inside was a mound of partially buried bones, scraps of flesh clinging to the grotesque relics of Evelyn's victims. Blood stained the wooden floor, old and dried in dark, crusted patches that spoke of horrors long past. Panic swelled as Levi stumbled away from the shed, his mind reeling at the enormity of what he'd uncovered, but he never made it back to town. Evelyn caught the scent of him as he fled, and her hunger roared like a beast awakened. She was on him before he could scream, dragging him into the darkness with monstrous strength. His blood painted the trail. He had dared to tread, but no one in Blackwood Creek was brave enough to follow it. By dawn, the trail had vanished, as if the forest itself had swallowed the evidence. The townsfolk, finding Levi's abandoned tools outside the mill, whispered once more about the curse of Blackwood and what waited in the shadows beyond their homes. Evelyn had long since stopped resisting the demon's hold. Hunger dictated her every movement now, primal and raw, overpowering even the lingering fragments of her humanity. Yet, in the smaller hours of twilight, she still wept beneath the altar where it all began. The demon coiled around her thoughts, like a serpent, its voice as sickly sweet as honey and as corrosive as acid. "You're perfect now, Evelyn," it whispered. "You've given your life meaning. They will fear your name for centuries. That's what you wanted, isn't it? To be remembered." "No," she murmured weakly, her voice trembling. "I wanted peace. I wanted Samuel." "Ah," the demon teased, its voice achingly familiar now, as if mimicking her late husband's tone. "He'll love you for what you've done. You've gone to such lengths for him. Isn't that what love is, Evelyn? Sacrifice?" But deep down, Evelyn knew the truth. Samuel would never look upon her with love again, were he able. The realization was a jagged blade, cutting through the tethers of sanity she had managed to cling to. Yet the hunger remained. It always did. By now, Blackwood Creek was no longer the quiet countryside hamlet it had once been. Fear was etched into every line of its crumbling walls. The streets emptied at dusk, doors and shutters bolted tight. Rumors spread like wildfire that Evelyn Grimshaw was no longer human, that she had become something dark and unnatural. No one dared say the word demon, though belief in such things had long been rooted in the town's history. The sheriff, Matthew Cody, organized the few fit men willing to stand against Evelyn. Of the 20 who joined, half carried nothing more than torches, their trembling hands betraying their lack of faith in their task. The others armed themselves with whatever they could find: knives, pitchforks, silver crucifixes. They stood on the edge of the forest that evening, flames flickering in the descending twilight, their breaths shallow and uneven. They were terrified of the stories, knowing few who entered Blackwood's depths returned whole. But they were more terrified of Evelyn waiting in the shadows, her hunger biding its time. When the first man entered, Evelyn's laughter floated from somewhere unseen. It was a sweet, childlike giggle, a sound that sent cracks through the bravado of even the bravest. They found nothing alive in the woods that night, but by morning they were reduced to broken shells, their minds shattered by what they had seen. Those who survived the hunt never spoke of what transpired, but their hollow stares said enough. Evelyn had become a creature of myth, a horror too great for mortal understanding. Evelyn's body, gaunt and emaciated, felt less like her own with each passing day. She had long since stopped recognizing her hands, now clawed and blackened as if scorched by the fires of another world. Her hunger no longer asked for human flesh, no longer feasted on just bodies. It was now deeper, darker. What the demon wanted was the very essence of her victims, the last light of their souls extinguished. As she fed, the demon demanded to consume not only life, but hope, quenching the faintest flickers of humanity left within her. One night, as she knelt before the altar that had stolen her life from her, Evelyn asked a single question aloud, her quiet voice trembling under the weight of the dark forest. "Why me?" For the first time, the demon answered not in laughter, but in something colder, sharper. "Because you begged me to." Under the flicker of the moonlight, Evelyn's scream reverberated across Blackwood, as if the forest itself had heard her despair. Her fate had been sealed the moment she had prayed for Samuel's return. Generations later, Blackwood Creek is little more than ruins. The forest, overgrown and crawling, now blankets whatever history it once bore. No sane person ventures near. Yet urban legends persist. They say Evelyn Grimshaw still roams the woods, a shadow of what she once was. Her hollow cries can be heard on quiet nights, her voice fractured by the wind that carries it. Her hunger, they say, can never truly be satisfied, no matter how many souls she devours. And if you wander too close to Blackwood and find yourself within its deathless shadows, tread carefully, for Evelyn's hunger knows no reason, no end, and those who meet her never leave to tell their story. Evelyn had always thought her hunger was the monster within her, but now, as the moon hung heavy over Blackwood, she realized it wasn't just inside her anymore. The hunger was alive in the very forest, seeping into the land itself. Wherever Evelyn walked, the trees twisted as if recoiling in fear or leaning in, eager accomplices to her destruction. The whispering wind that had once plagued her thoughts now surrounded her, an eerie chorus of anguished voices that seemed to call her toward new victims. Late one night, Evelyn found herself drawn toward the edge of the forest where an encampment of travelers had foolishly set up for the night. A small band of wanderers. They had no idea of the cursed ground they had chosen to rest upon. Evelyn watched from the shadows, her sharp fingernails digging into the bark of a tree as she studied the flickering firelight that outlined their movements. The demon within her purred, coaxing her forward. "They'll never leave this forest," it crooned. "Make them part of you. Feed us both." Evelyn's human tears streaked down her face as she stalked toward the campsite, but her body no longer obeyed her pleas to stop. The travelers barely had time to scream as Evelyn descended upon them, tearing through their defenseless forms with horrifying precision. The snap of bones and the wet squelch of flesh echoed through the night as the demon reveled in each moment. When the carnage was over, Evelyn sat among the remnants in the flickering firelight, her bloodied hands shaking. Her humanity was crumbling with each passing day, but the worst part was the silence after a feast. It was almost comforting now, a moment of stillness before the hunger roared alive again. The voices of the travelers had joined the cacophony in her mind, screaming and wailing for their stolen lives. The demon laughed, delighted at this new addition to her torment. The people of Ashveil, worn thin by terror, reached a collective breaking point. The town's only priest, Father Rylan, an aging man with trembling hands, gathered what remained of his congregation in the town square for a desperate plea. "This is no longer a human struggle," he announced, his voice cracking. "This is a war against evil itself." Few responded to the priest's call to arms. Most were paralyzed with fear, unwilling to risk their lives against the legend Evelyn had become. Yet a group of 6 desperate souls volunteered to confront the horrors. In the forest, armed with faith and an arsenal of hastily blessed weapons, Father Rylan himself led the group, clutching a wooden cross so tightly his knuckles turned white. They entered Blackwood Forest just before nightfall. The trees seemed to close in behind them, branches groaning in protest as they passed. "Die, deeper they ventured, the heavier the air became, thick with the smell of rot and decay. Strange markings appeared on the trees, clawed into the bark as if warning them to turn back. Still, Father Ryland pressed on, his voice hoarse as he led the group in prayer. It wasn't long before Evelyn found them. She stepped into their path, shrouded in darkness, her glowing green eyes cutting through the mist. Her once human figure was now distorted, her limbs elongated, and her movements impossibly fast. The priest froze, his breaths ragged as he raised the cross toward her trembling form. But Evelyn was beyond the reach of salvation. With an ear-splitting roar, she descended upon the group. They fought valiantly, their desperate bravery no match for her feral strength. One by one, their pitiful cries were swallowed by the forest, until only Father Ryland remained. Pinned beneath Evelyn's clawed hand, he stared into the hollow shell of the woman he once knew. "You can still be saved, Evelyn," he whispered weakly. "This isn't who you are." Evelyn hesitated. For a fleeting moment, her human self surged forward, her bloodied hand loosening its grip. But the demon roared in triumph, and her monstrous teeth sank into his throat before she could stop herself. His blood pooled in the dirt as the forest grew silent once more. The remnants of Ashveil stood in desperate silence after Father Ryland's group failed to return. The few surviving residents sealed their homes, leaving their fields to wither and rot. Rumors spread that Evelyn had claimed the forest entirely, that no mortal soul could enter and hope to survive. Inside her prison of flesh and hunger, Evelyn knew the rumors were true. She was no longer tethered to her humanity. The demon had claimed her completely, merging her soul with the cursed forest itself. Her steps seemed to shake the earth now, each movement echoing like a thunderclap. Shadows coiled around her, living extensions of her baleful existence. The hunger, once a gnawing ache within her, had become an insatiable void that threatened to consume the world around her. With each new kill, Evelyn absorbed not only flesh, but light, colors, and sound, leaving patches of the forest eerily silent and drained of life. The demon, now an inseparable part of her, spoke with a voice that filled her mind with dread. "You are my masterpiece, Evelyn," it purred. "The forest is yours as it was always meant to be." Evelyn wandered deep into the heart of Blackwood Forest, searching for the altar where it had all begun. She stood before it, her blood-streaked reflection staring back at her in the stone's glossy surface. This time, the altar did not glow. Instead, it pulsed faintly, a reminder of the deal she had struck. "Release me," Evelyn whispered, her voice fractured. "I beg you." The demon's laughter sliced through her thoughts. "You wanted Samuel's love. You wanted to escape your grief. You got what you asked for, Evelyn. A life where nothing can leave you, not even your hunger." Evelyn dropped to her knees, screaming so loudly the forest shuddered, leaves cascading in a mournful rainfall around her. Her cries echoed long after they faded into the mist, mixing with the eternal howls of her victims. That night, Ashveil fell into complete silence. Only the whispers of the forest remained, mingling with Evelyn's wails as she patrolled the woods. Her hunger burned endlessly, never satisfied, never silenced. And to this day, the legend warns all who approach Blackwood Forest, beware its shadows, beware its silence, for they belong to Evelyn Grimshaw, a woman cursed to feed forever, and a beast no mortal can comprehend. Blackwood is her domain now, and no one who dares enter escapes her hunger.